Power does not ask politely for obedience. It does not negotiate with weakness or compromise with hesitation. Power is a tide that moves forward without pause, and anyone who stands against it is pulled under and drowned. The law of submission is older than kingdoms, older than religion, older even than the stories carved into stone. It is the law that governs every living thing, from the smallest insect that bows to the pattern of its hive, to the empires that demand the loyalty of millions. To live in this world is to kneel before something greater, whether you recognize it or not. You may tell yourself that you are free, that you walk your own path, but every choice you make bends towards some master. Sometimes that master is visible, a king, a boss, a soldier with a rifle. Sometimes it is invisible, fear, desire, hunger, survival. You submit because you must, because the alternative is not independence but destruction. Those who deny this truth are always the first to be broken, crushed not because they resisted nobly, but because they mistook stubbornness for strength. Submission is not cowardice, it is acknowledgement of reality. To obey is not always to be weak. It can be a strategy, a shield, even a weapon. But to refuse when the current of power demands surrender is to invite annihilation. This is the first lesson. In a world built on force, the question is never if you will submit, but to whom. And once you understand that, you see that survival itself is submission to the law that rules all. Submission begins the moment you are born. A child obeys the rhythm of the mother's body, the air, the warmth, the hand that feeds and protects. Before you have language, before you can even think, you are already bending to forces that will shape you forever. This is not weakness. It is the only way to live. Every creature bows, not out of choice, but out of necessity. Look at the wolf that lowers its head to the alpha, the bird that flees when the shadow of the hawk falls across the ground, the soldier who obeys the order to march even though he hates the command. They understand something most humans forget. Survival is not found in endless defiance, but in the wisdom of knowing when to yield. Yet humans lie to themselves more than any other species. We tell stories about freedom, about self-rule, about the power of the individual to resist. We build monuments to rebels and dreamers and call them immortal. But for every rebel who lived long enough to leave a mark, there are thousands erased, forgotten, crushed into the dirt by the powers they dared to challenge. The myth of defiance is celebrated because it is rare, and rarity is beautiful. But rarity is also fragile. Most people who stand against power do not become heroes. They become corpses, sacrifices buried in silence. The law of submission whispers this reality. You will bend, whether you choose to or not. And if you pretend that you are above this law, life itself will prove you wrong. The crushing weight of time, hunger, fear, and authority will remind you. Those who endure are not the ones who refuse to kneel, but the ones who kneel wisely, who learn that obedience can be temporary, tactical, and silent until the day comes when the balance shifts. The truth that terrifies most people is that submission never disappears, it only changes shape. You can spend your life convincing yourself that you answer to no one, but you are still kneeling to something. Your fears, your ambitions, your cravings, your past. Even rebellion is a form of obedience, for when you fight against a ruler, you are still letting that ruler define you. Power bends reality so that even your resistance becomes proof of its reach. This is why so many who fight the system end up strengthening it instead, becoming pawns inside the very machine they thought they opposed. Submission is not a matter of pride. It is a matter of mathematics. You measure yourself against the weight of forces beyond you, and you realize that defiance without calculation is suicide. The world does not reward the loudest defier. It rewards the one who bows carefully, who waits, who studies the hand that strikes, and only rises when that hand weakens. That is why history remembers not only rebels, but also survivors. The ones who appeared obedient until the moment came to step out of the shadows and seize control. Those who live long enough to tell their story are never the ones who confused refusal with strength. They are the ones who understood that bending is not the same as breaking. To live is to submit, but to live well is to master the art of submission, to know when obedience is protection, when it is camouflage, and when it is a ladder to climb higher. Every king once bowed to another. Every general once obeyed orders. Every empire was once a servant to a greater one. The law of submission spares no one, but those who learn to wield it turn what looks like weakness into power. In the end, the choice is not between submission and freedom, but between intelligent submission and blind destruction. That is the law, written into the bones of existence, and those who ignore it are always crushed. Freedom is the sweetest lie ever whispered into the ears of men. It is the story carved into monuments, the anthem shouted in revolutions, the dream painted in books and banners and promises. Yet when you peel back the surface, you find that freedom is nothing but another mask, a word carefully designed to keep people obedient while believing they are unchained. The worker who wakes at dawn, who drags himself into the factory or the office, who spends his hours bending to schedules and bosses, believes he is free because he chooses his employer. The citizen who votes for rulers every few years believes he is free because he selects one master over another. The child who rebels against his parents believes he is free because he defies authority, but he is still a prisoner of hunger, fear, and the need for approval. The chains are hidden in plain sight, disguised as choice. Power understands that visible chains cause revolt, but invisible chains create loyalty. The illusion of freedom is stronger than any prison wall because you cannot escape from something you do not see. This is why men defend their servitude with pride, calling it liberty, why they guard their own cages as if they were treasures. The truth is brutal. You are never free. You are only granted the illusion of freedom so that you obey willingly, thinking the leash in your mouth is a crown on your head. Those who cling to this illusion walk proudly into their own defeat, and they never see the jaws of power close until it is too late. The illusion of freedom endures because it feeds the ego. People want to believe they are captains of their own fate, that their choices matter, that their will shapes the world around them. Power gives them just enough proof to sustain the dream. Small victories, token liberties, moments of defiance that seem to change something but never threaten the structure itself. A man may switch jobs, move cities, change leaders, even reject religion, yet at every step he is still kneeling to systems larger than himself, to money, to law, to culture, to the relentless demands of survival. True freedom would require severing ties to all of these, a step so terrifying that almost no one dares to take it. To be truly free is to stand alone in the abyss, with no master to serve, no story to follow, no net to catch you if you fall. Few can bear that weight, so they cling to illusions instead, convincing themselves that the leash is light, that the cage is wide enough, that the chains are made of silk. And power smiles, because a population that mistakes obedience for liberty will never rise, never threaten, never truly awaken. The rare souls who tear through the illusion are often cast out, branded as madmen, heretics, criminals. The world despises those who see too clearly, for they remind the herd of its captivity. And so the law of submission hides behind the illusion of freedom, invisible yet absolute, ruling lives without ever needing to reveal its hand. Control is most effective when it is invisible. A whip cracks and people resist. A gun fires and people rebel. But when the chains are woven into daily life, into the quiet routines and rituals that feel natural, people no longer see them as chains at all. This is the machinery of control, subtle, constant, designed to guide without appearing to force. Schools teach obedience more than knowledge, conditioning children to sit, to wait, to speak only when permitted, to accept authority as natural. Workplaces reinforce the same rhythm, measuring hours, demanding productivity, rewarding compliance. Even leisure is harnessed, filled with entertainment that dulls questioning minds, feeding illusions of choice while ensuring the same narratives repeat endlessly. People think they are living freely, but they are moving along tracks built long before they were born. The system does not need to shout. It only needs to whisper with enough repetition that obedience becomes instinct. And the brilliance of this design is that it recruits its subjects to maintain it. Parents teach their children to respect the same rules. Workers enforce norms on one another. Citizens shame those who step outside the invisible boundaries. The machinery runs because those inside it become both prisoners and guards. By the time someone realizes the cage exists, it has already shaped their thoughts, their desires, their identity. The walls are not metal, but belief. The locks are not physical, but fear. This is why the machinery endures, because most will never even know it is there. Control is most effective when it is invisible. A whip cracks and people resist. A gun fires and people rebel. But when the chains are woven into daily life, into the quiet routines and rituals that feel natural, people no longer see them as chains at all. This is the machinery of control, subtle, constant, designed to guide without appearing to force. Schools teach obedience more than knowledge, conditioning children to sit, to wait, to speak only when permitted, to accept authority as natural. Workplaces reinforce the same rhythm, measuring hours, demanding productivity, rewarding compliance. Even leisure is harnessed, filled with entertainment that dulls questioning minds, feeding illusions of choice while ensuring the same narratives repeat endlessly. People think they are living freely, but they are moving along tracks built long before they were born. The system does not need to shout. It only needs to whisper with enough repetition that obedience becomes instinct. And the brilliance of this design is that it recruits its subjects to maintain it. Parents teach their children to respect the same rules. Workers enforce norms on one another. Citizens shame those who step outside the invisible boundaries. The machinery runs because those inside it become both prisoners and guards. By the time someone realizes the cage exists, it has already shaped their thoughts, their desires, their identity. The walls are not metal, but belief. The locks are not physical, but fear. This is why the machinery endures, because most will never even know it is there. The system does not survive by crushing resistance alone. It survives by shaping desire. A man who longs for his chains will never dream of breaking them. This is why control does not simply restrict. It seduces. It offers rewards for obedience, small pleasures that taste like freedom but are carefully measured to keep the hunger alive. Promotions, salaries, praise, recognition. These are crumbs scattered along the path, ensuring people march forward willingly. The machinery of control thrives because it convinces people that they are climbing when in truth they are only circling inside the same cage. The promise of more keeps them obedient. More wealth, more status, more approval. Even rebellion is absorbed, commodified, and sold back as fashion, as music, as politics. The system swallows defiance and spits it out as another product, leaving the illusion of choice intact while the core remains untouched. This is why true opposition is rare, because the machinery is clever enough to give people outlets, masks of resistance that drain their anger without ever threatening power. You can scream in the streets, you can wear symbols of rebellion, you can rage online, and the machinery watches calmly, knowing that nothing has changed. The cage adapts, expands, decorates itself, but it never opens. Real defiance would require stepping outside entirely, abandoning the comforts and illusions, but almost no one dares to sacrifice what the system provides. And so the machinery grinds on, stronger than force, stronger than fear, because it controls not just actions, but hearts and minds. The brilliance of the machinery is that it convinces people to maintain it themselves. No tyrant can watch every subject. No ruler can silence every voice. Yet the machinery ensures that the crowd becomes its own enforcer. Neighbors monitor neighbors. Colleagues report colleagues. Families pressure their children to conform, and strangers shame one another into obedience. This is the genius of soft power. It hides behind the faces of ordinary people, so the victim never knows whom to fight. You cannot topple an enemy when the enemy is the air you breathe, the words you speak, the culture you inherit. Control becomes a mirror, and when you rebel, you find yourself rebelling against your own reflection. This creates despair so deep that most surrender before they even begin. And yet, the machinery does not need to crush everyone. It only needs to make defiance costly enough that the majority police themselves. A few examples: a dissident punished, a rebel silenced, are enough to terrify the rest into compliance. The machine runs on fear disguised as normality, on obedience disguised as morality. And because most people want to belong, they surrender willingly, afraid of exile more than chains. This is the deepest layer of control, not the force that punishes, but the silence that isolates. A man who stands against the machine feels not only the weight of authority, but the abandonment of his peers, and this loneliness breaks more rebels than any whip or gun. Thus, the machinery of control remains eternal because it does not merely rule bodies. It rules the human need for acceptance. Most defiance is theater. People wear rebellion like a costume, loud enough to be seen, but safe enough to avoid real consequences. The system knows this and allows it, even encourages it, because false defiance strengthens control. When the crowd believes it has rebelled, it feels powerful, and when it feels powerful, it calms down, never noticing that nothing has changed. Marches fill the streets, slogans echo against the walls, symbols of resistance spread across shirts and flags. But once the shouting ends, people return to the same routines, bowing to the same masters. This is the mask of defiance. Resistance drained of danger, rebellion stripped of risk. It looks bold, but bends safely within the limits drawn by power. The rulers do not fear this kind of defiance. They feed on it. It makes people believe they are free while ensuring the machinery remains untouched. Real rebellion threatens, but theatrical rebellion entertains. The system loves the rebel who plays on stage, who rages within the boundaries, who sells the image of resistance as a product. Because as long as defiance is a mask, it is no different from obedience. It serves the same master, only dressed in louder colors. And most who wear this mask are too afraid to take it off, because behind it lies silence, exile, or death. The illusion of rebellion is one of the most powerful tools of control. When people feel they have spoken, they stop demanding to be heard. When they feel they have fought, they stop hungering for victory. The system understands this, so it offers spaces for anger to be expressed safely, like a vent in a pressure chamber. Citizens can argue online, shout in protests, or slogans, even insult their leaders publicly, but only within carefully managed boundaries. It feels like rebellion, but it is already permitted rebellion scripted in advance. Like actors playing roles in a play they did not write, people move within lines set by those who hold real power. This mask allows people to release their rage without ever threatening the structure that enrages them. And because most people crave the feeling of courage more than its cost, they accept the mask as enough. They prefer the applause of the crowd to the silence of true danger. Real defiance requires sacrifice, jobs lost, families abandoned, exile, prison, sometimes blood. But few are willing to pay this price. So instead, they cling to the mask, satisfied with gestures that appear bold but are secretly harmless. And in this way, the mask of defiance becomes another chain, deceiving those who wear it into believing they have resisted, when in truth, they have only performed obedience in louder tones. True defiance is rare because it demands more than words, more than symbols, more than performance. It requires a willingness to step beyond the safe boundaries, to cross the invisible line where rebellion becomes threat. That is the point where power strikes hardest, and most retreat before ever reaching it. This is why the system tolerates masks. It knows very few will risk taking them off. The crowd may chant, the masses may rage, but when the guns appear, when the prisons open, when the silence of exile looms, the rebellion dissolves into theater again. Real defiance is lonely. It is not cheered, it is feared. The one who dares to truly resist does not receive applause. They receive betrayal from their peers, punishment from their rulers, abandonment from those who once shouted beside them. To stand against power is to accept isolation, to walk into darkness where few will follow. This is why most prefer the mask. It lets them taste the thrill of courage without swallowing the cost. Yet the mask is a lie, and lies rot the soul. To live behind it is to accept that your rebellion is permitted, staged, even purchased from the same system you claim to fight. And so the mask of defiance becomes the most dangerous submission of all, because it convinces you that you are free when you are still kneeling. Power does not fear the mask. It fears the one who tears it off and steps into the silence beyond. Few ever do, and those few rarely survive. But it is in their shadows that the truth of defiance still flickers, haunting the world that prefers masks to fire. Fear has always been the first tool of power. Before laws were written, before crowns were forged, before armies marched, fear ruled the world. The child obeys the parent not because of reason, but because of fear, the fear of punishment, the fear of abandonment, the fear of pain. Nations obey kings for the same reason. Soldiers obey generals, workers obey bosses, believers obey priests. Fear is the invisible whip, striking without leaving scars, cutting deeper than any blade. It settles into the bones, shaping behavior long before thought arrives. This is why power prefers fear over love, fear over respect, fear over trust. Love fades. Respect must be earned. Trust can be broken, but fear endures. A fearful man obeys even when no one is watching, because fear plants guards inside his own mind. He polices himself, restrains himself, bends himself to fit the will of another. Entire civilizations have been built on this weight. Towering structures of obedience pressed down upon the shoulders of the frightened. And yet, most do not recognize fear for what it is. They call it duty, loyalty, morality, faith. But strip away the masks, and fear remains, cold and ancient, whispering that survival demands submission. This is the weight of fear. It teaches obedience faster than reason ever could, and once it takes root, it rarely lets go. Fear does not simply exist in moments of threat. It becomes a constant atmosphere, a climate that conditions every choice. A man who lives under fear begins to shrink his own possibilities before anyone else restricts them. He censors his speech, he measures his tone, he avoids paths that might invite punishment, even when no punishment is near. This is the quiet genius of fear. It does not need chains when it can train the prisoner to chain himself. And once this conditioning spreads across a society, it forms an invisible cage stronger than any wall. Citizens walk freely, but only within the limits set by their anxieties. They smile at leaders they despise. They obey rules they know are absurd. They betray neighbors to avoid suspicion. They silence truth to protect themselves. Fear turns human beings into collaborators with their own oppression. And rulers understand this, so they never need to exhaust themselves in constant violence. They simply make examples. A few punishments, publicly displayed, are enough to remind the masses of what can happen. Fear then carries the message deeper than any speech could. It enters the blood, it shapes dreams, it becomes instinct. Over time, people forget where the fear began. They inherit it, pass it down like a cursed heirloom, teaching children not to speak, not to question, not to resist. What was once imposed becomes natural. The cage disappears because it has been accepted as the shape of life itself. That is the final victory of fear. It convinces its victims that their submission is not submission at all, but survival, prudence, even wisdom. They do not feel crushed, but safe. Yet in that safety, their spirit rots, until all that remains is a life lived in anticipation of pain that rarely arrives, but always threatens. The weight of fear is heaviest not when violence strikes, but when it lingers in silence, shaping the soul without a sound. It bends the back, it lowers the eyes, it convinces the victim that resistance is suicide and obedience is survival. And so people make a bargain with fear. They surrender freedom in exchange for a fragile sense of safety. Yet this bargain is a lie, because fear never stops demanding more. Once you bow to it, you must bow lower, until there is no self left to protect. The rulers of the world know this truth well, and they cultivate it with precision. They spread uncertainty, they whisper threats, they let rumors grow like weeds until paranoia takes root in every corner. A fearful population is easy to control because it fights itself more than it fights its masters. Suspicion replaces unity, silence replaces courage, and despair replaces hope. And in that darkness, power thrives. But what fear cannot extinguish is the spark of recognition. The rare moment when someone sees that the chains are made not of iron, but of belief. To awaken from fear is to feel its illusion breaking, to realize that most of its weight comes from within. That moment is dangerous, for it threatens the entire structure of control. This is why power punishes the fearless with such brutality. Not because they are many, but because they reveal that fear itself is fragile, that the cage was never unbreakable. Most will never risk such awakening. They will live and die under the shadow, convinced that obedience is protection. Yet history remembers the few who tore the mask away, who carried the unbearable weight of fear and refused to bow. They remind us of the terrible secret. Fear enslaves only if you accept its crown. Power is never free. Every man who reaches for it believes he can hold it without cost. But the truth is harsher. Power demands a sacrifice greater than most are willing to pay. To rise above others, you must strip away the illusions that comfort ordinary lives. You must trade peace for vigilance, innocence for calculation, and rest for constant struggle. The higher you climb, the heavier the crown becomes, until it no longer feels like victory but survival. Those who rule learn that every ally is temporary, every friend a potential rival, every loyal servant a future betrayer. Power isolates because it cannot trust. The moment you believe someone loves you for yourself, you risk losing everything. This is the price. Endless suspicion, endless guarding of what you have built, endless fear of falling. And yet, men still chase it, because power promises immortality. Even if the body dies, the name survives, carved into history by the weight of command. But history does not tell the nights of paranoia, the faces of betrayal, the exhaustion of being hunted by those you once ruled. To sit on the throne is to sit in a storm, admired by those below but struck by lightning again and again. Many imagine power as freedom, but true power is chains of another kind. Chains that bind not the body but the soul. And still, some choose them, because to live without power feels like death, while to live with it feels like burning slowly. The hunger for power blinds men to the toll it takes once it is in their hands. They see the throne as a reward, but the throne is a furnace, consuming those who sit upon it. The powerful cannot rest, for rest invites rivals. They cannot love freely, for love creates weakness. They cannot speak openly, for every word is a weapon that can be turned against them. To maintain control, they must always play a role, wearing masks upon masks, until the line between self and performance disappears. This is the hidden cruelty of power. It demands not only your enemy's obedience, but also your own transformation into something less than human. You are no longer a man. You are an institution, a figure, a symbol that must never falter. And symbols do not bleed, do not doubt, do not tremble. Yet the man behind the mask does, endlessly, in secret. That secret eats away at the soul until paranoia becomes the air you breathe. Every whisper sounds like conspiracy. Every glance feels like judgment. Every silence carries the echo of betrayal. What the world calls strength is often nothing but the exhaustion of someone who cannot afford to break. To hold power is to be hunted as much as it is to hunt, and this truth corrodes even the strongest will. Yet still, the game continues, for once a man tastes authority, stepping down feels like death. He would rather pay the price forever than admit he was never free. The greatest tragedy of power is that it deceives even those who master it. Men believe they can wield it without becoming its prisoner, but power devours without mercy. The empire you build becomes a cage you cannot leave. You are trapped by the weight of your own victories. chained by the fear of losing what you have conquered. Every conquest requires another. Every triumph demands the next, until the pursuit itself consumes your life. And still, there is no final victory. The powerful learn too late that power is an endless hunger, not a destination. To feed it, they sacrifice peace, trust, love, and even their own humanity. The more they gain, the less they can enjoy. The more they rise, the lonelier they become. This is the hidden price no one sees. Not the glory carved in stone, but the emptiness carved in the heart. The king who cannot sleep, the ruler who cannot smile without suspicion, the general who cannot hold his child without fearing betrayal. These are the real faces of power. And yet, the cycle repeats, because ambition blinds the living and history hides the suffering of the dead. We remember their crowns, their empires, their triumphs, but not the nights they drowned in dread. Perhaps that is the cruelest truth. Power is not inherited, it is not given, it is borrowed, and it collects its debt in flesh and spirit. Those who seek it must know this. To win power is to lose yourself, and to keep it is to watch the cost rise forever.